Hey everybody, it's Aiden, and feeling a little depressed today. So, as a coping mechanism, I'm going to make a video on depression. Alright, so just some precursors. Number one, I'm bipolar type 1 with psychotic features, so I've experienced pretty much every single one of the things that I'm saying. Number two, I have a psych bachelor's degree, but I'm in graduate school as a master's of social work in my last semester, and I intern at a psychiatric hospital, and I've seen all these things at the psychiatric hospital. So I'm going to be saying a lot of this stuff based on personal experience, my education, and my experience in the psychiatric hospital working. And then obviously, I've been psychiatrically hospitalized myself like 6 times, so I'm going to be talking from that experience too. So anyways, I want to try to make this video interesting, but again, kind of depressed, so how interesting can it be? But anyways, I haven't written a script for this video. We're just sort of going. I'm going to try to edit it and make it as cohesive as possible. But okay, so I really wanted to make a video on the different strains of depression because depression is really complex and there's a lot of shit that goes into it. Very multifaceted. There's not one type of depression. It goes pretty deep. So the two major strains that we're going to talk about are sadness and numbness, or anhedonia. Those are the big two that are defined, and they can be pretty different, and we're going to be talking about different domains. So in psychopathology, generally, we have two main domains. We have distress and impairment. So depression, depending on the type, can cause different levels of distress and different levels of impairment. So if you don't know, let's do an overview of the symptoms. And again, this is going to vary. Also, you can flip-flop between both of these. They're not exclusive. But the sadness domain, you're going to be experiencing, obviously, sadness. You're going to be feeling down. Typically, you have low self-esteem. You may have increased emotional reactivity, so relatively mundane things might happen, and that may affect you very deeply. And then typically, you may have crying spells, so crying, especially if you're emotionally reactive, little things happen, you start crying. But also, you just may start crying for no reason. You know, other people may not see a reason, you may start crying. You probably will experience guilt and shame, like if you feel guilty that you're putting this on your family and friends, you may feel like a burden. So again, you may be crying a lot, be especially emotionally reactive, but on the complete other side, if you have the numbness type, the anhedonia, you may experience pretty much no emotion at all. You may not be able to cry. Things may happen that should be distressing and you may not feel anything in response. Typically, you will lose interest in things that you typically find interesting. You will lose motivation. You may not see a point in doing anything at all because, I don't know, life's meaningless. You may feel nihilistic. Stuff like that. So also another domain would be cognitive impairment. And sort of like I talked about, the two main domains are distress and impairment. So the sadness side, that's really where you're going to see the most subjective distress. But impairment can sort of be caused on all levels, regardless of what type you have. A major one being distractibility, but then also you just generally may feel cognitively impaired. You may not be able to think very quickly. You may experience memory problems. In my experience, you can kind of just feel drunk, like without the euphoria, you just sort of feel drunk, like you can't think. Your thoughts may be racing, or on the other hand, you may not have any thoughts at all. Also, you may experience some anxiety that comes along with it. Depression and anxiety are very comorbid. You may experience more sleep or too little sleep. So, and the too little sleep, I think we have to differentiate from like a manic too little sleep, because you'll see sleep disruption in depression and mania in bipolar disorder. So a manic lack of sleep is typically more so like you don't want to sleep or you don't feel a need to sleep, especially if it's project oriented. You probably will be so focused on your project that you don't feel a need to sleep. Whereas in depression, you'll see more insomnia, which is where you want to sleep, but you can't. And in like a mixed episode, you may see more like insomnia, where it's someone maybe like manic, so they can't sleep, except they want to sleep. So that's sort of one instance where you may see both. And on the very extreme end, you may experience psychosis. And this is not talked about as much. And I'll talk about what disorders tend to come with psychosis. If you don't know what psychosis is, that is when you experience breaks from reality, and they are typically delusions and hallucinations. Those are considered positive symptoms where they are additions to reality, but then you also have negative symptoms, which are more flat affect. So instead of feeling sad or manic, you actually feel nothing at all, kind of like that anhedonia, numbness one that we talked about. And then on another extreme end, we have catatonia, where someone pretty much just completely shuts down and they don't move at all. They can freeze in certain positions, or they maybe just like rocking back and forth, and then they don't respond to external stimuli. So with psychosis, we can say responding to internal stimuli, so that would be like hallucinations, or you don't respond to external stimuli at all, and that would be more of like a catatonic state. But the vast majority of people won't experience that, so that's good, because that's probably the most severe aspect of it. But obviously, if we start categorizing certain things as severe versus not, it can get a little bit dicey, because subjectively everybody experiences different levels of stress, and especially once you get into suicidality. So someone with schizoaffective who suffers with psychosis their entire life, but then also bouts of major depression or mania, is that any less or more severe than someone who just has typical unipolar major depression who kills himself? Let's talk about the disorders that come with depression, because it can be a lot. The main one that we think of is major depressive disorder. That's unipolar. That's probably the one that's diagnosed the most. I think it's about 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 in the population have major depressive. And major depressive exists on such a giant spectrum, especially working in the psychiatric hospital. I've seen such a huge range of major depressive disorder. This may be someone who just slightly struggles. They may have some sadness at certain points, or they may feel a little bit numb, but they can generally go about their day-to-day life. You may have some people who just have some major depressive points very rarely, or you have people who have major depressive episodes that last years and may have psychosis, or people who literally physically move slowly and they slur their words, like they are so depressed that, they can barely move. And that's some things that I experience sometimes, like you may have your limbs feeling extremely heavy and like you can't fucking move. Or like I said, you may even feel drunk and you start slurring your words. I know I'm in recovery of 6 years clean, and my mom has sort of like noticed that like I'm slurring my words. And I'm like, I swear to fucking God, I'm not on drugs or alcohol. It's just like I'm that affected right now. So anyways, you have major depressive disorder, and then the other unipolar depression that you see a lot is called persistent depressive disorder. It used to be called dysthymia. I'm going to talk a little bit more about dysthymia. Major depressive episodes are at least 2 weeks long. Dysthymia, you have episodes that are less severe, so they don't quite meet that like major depressive severity, but they last like years. So we will also see brief depressive disorders. So instead of major depressive episodes that last 2 weeks, you experience depression symptoms, but they only last like 2 days to a week. And brief depressive episodes, we're going to sort of talk about episodes. Again, this is going to be a little chaotic. Brief depressive episodes are also common in bipolar disorder, but are also less talked about. So yeah, then we get to some of the more severe stuff that we're going to be talking about. Again, severe, subjective, but bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder, you obviously fluctuate between depression and mania. Type 2 bipolar disorder is predominantly depression, and then you have what we call hypomanic episodes, so they don't meet criteria for a full-blown manic episode. But interestingly, bipolar type 1, which we consider the more severe bipolar disorder, you actually don't ever have to have experienced a major depressive episode, just mania. However, it would be pretty damn rare for someone with mania to never experience depression. However, the majority of the depression experienced by people with bipolar disorder, and this is shown in research, are actually brief depressive episodes. So that would be that 1 day to, it's typically like 1 to 3 days, but also 1 day to a week, sub major depressive length, which again is 2 weeks. Okay, bouncing off of bipolar disorder, we then have schizoaffective disorder, which can have schizoaffective major depressive type or schizoaffective bipolar type. We typically see schizoaffective bipolar type in the psych ward, but this is when you have psychosis that is both during depressive episodes, or in the case of bipolar type, depressive or manic episodes, but then you also have psychosis that exists outside of depressive and manic episodes. However, don't get it confused. Those are not the only ones that have psychosis, actually. We have mood disorders with psychotic features. So we tend to see bipolar disorder with psychotic features more, especially during manic episodes, but we do also have major depressive disorder with psychotic features. And I have seen that in the psych ward. It's pretty interesting. Like you have depressive episodes that are so severe, people are experiencing psychosis. And this may be delusions of guilt, like people who think that like natural disasters are actually their fault, or things like that. But then we also see hallucinations, delusions. We also have borderline personality disorder who generally experiences pretty severe depressive states, but those may not be even a brief episode. Those may just be like hours. You may see a very dramatic mood swing into a depressive state multiple times per day. Very emotionally reactive. So like some little thing may happen that like the average person may not consider very severe at all. And then that may push that person into a depressive state very easily. And then you may see a very dramatic swing the other direction within the same day. Similarly, in bipolar disorder, you have mixed episodes, and you may see something similar to that, where you may see someone having extreme mania, and then they swing very dramatically to depression. And then also mixed episodes are really interesting because you may experience depression, but then also manic symptoms. So like in the psych ward, I'll see, for example, someone who's severely depressed, but they have pressured manic speech. So like they will be talking very rapidly and they may be very tangential, but at the same time, they're severely depressed and like bedridden and suicidal. And then we will tie more into what I consider more of situational depression. So this is depression that sort of results from either environmental factors or in many cases, they're resulting from trauma. So like PTSD, the trauma results in more depressive symptoms. Trauma is a little bit difficult because trauma is linked to a number of disorders. So like trauma may trigger some bipolar disorder, but then at that point, that is more biological depressive episodes, or it may trigger full major depressive disorder. And then we see that more on like a biological scale, but it's not just a reaction to trauma. It can be a little bit confusing. But situational depression may arise from things like, poverty, racism, these societal factors that are just pretty depressing generally. So it may not even be like pathological in the sense of like a biological disorder like bipolar disorder, schizoaffective, borderline, but it may be just like your environment sucks. It's pushing you into this depressive state, understandably. So even in disorders like ADHD, for example, someone who has such severe ADHD that they can't function, they can't hold a job, they may feel guilty, or they may feel like they just can't function, and then in result, they may have depressive symptoms. They may feel worthless, or like severe guilt or insecurity that may push them into a depressive state. Autism. But autism is a whole different topic, and the spectrum of autism covers such a large spectrum, especially in people assigned female at birth who have female hormones, stuff like that. The way that it manifests is very different than what most research is on, which is biological males, young males. So there's so much gray area. Yes. So, okay, I forgot to add this part, but we also see depression a lot in substance use disorders, and that's an interesting intersection between environmental and biological. It can be biological in the sense that, like, especially if you're coming down off of drugs like amphetamines, psychedelics, stuff like that, and even like opiate and alcohol withdrawals, the brain is literally depleted of the neurotransmitters associated with depression, so that can cause like a biological depression. But then we also see environmental depression or situational depression in that people will become depressed and or suicidal because they can't stop using drugs, or maybe more commonly, they have lost everything in their life, such as their relationships, their job, their money, their self-esteem, things like that. They have lost all those things because of their drug use, so they become depressed. Similarly, we also see depression in eating disorders a lot for very similar things, but especially we see body image issues, heavy self-esteem issues, and then also just the biological toll that it takes on your body. So we often see it in eating disorders. And then both of those are just commonly comorbid or co-occur with disorders associated with depression anyways, like bipolar disorder, for example. It's very common to see substance use disorder, and like borderline, you may often see eating disorders. I mean, you see eating disorders common in bipolar disorder too, and major depressive disorder. And those can be maladaptive coping mechanisms, or they can just both be like genetic. So yeah, those are two important things to note. We also have like entire substance induced bipolar and depression. Those are their own things kind of, but like bipolar and substance use genuinely do frequently coexist with each other, but substance use can also mimic like a pseudo bipolar disorder. And that will quickly subside once that person stops using substances. So if someone gets clean and the symptoms of bipolar disorder or their depression goes away, then that is a substance-induced mood disorder. But if they get clean and then the symptoms persist for, like years, then that is a genuine co-occurring disorder. So that is legitimate bipolar disorder. I mean, either way, the symptoms are legitimate. The person is subjectively experiencing it. It's just comes down to whether or not that will be a chronic condition. Because bipolar disorder, typically major depressive disorder, those are chronic conditions. Similar, yeah, never mind. I won't even talk about schizophrenia. I won't even talk about that. One thing that I wanted to do is sort of make a three-way Venn diagram of the different domains of symptoms of depression. So also, I really wanted to talk about suicidality and self-harm, but this video is already pretty long, and those are their own behemoths of topics. So I guess I'll save that, but I mean, a big thing is that suicidality actually isn't exclusive to depression, which is something that some people find pretty surprising, but only a certain portion of suicides are actually associated with mental illness. Some of them are just sort of like we talked about, they're situational. I mean, think about like the guys on Wall Street in 2008. Like that, where it is just like a snap impulsive decision in the moment, not caused by like depression, but whatever. It's its own topic. But yeah, I think I'm gonna do another video on that, maybe like an entire thing, or even separate videos on each of them, because they are distinct things. Not all self-harm is related to suicidality. Not all suicidality comes with traditional self-harm. So yeah, okay. The existing outro I had to this video was completely chaotic, and like the camera was just falling off of the tripod, and it was just a shit show. So the camera is getting so off kilter. It's just progressively, this tripod sucks ass, dude. This little tripod, I can't, because I just have it on this desk. Oh, God damn it. God damn it. Whatever. It's fucked up. Big bummer going on there. But yeah, I don't know. Oh my good Lord. Okay, I'm just gonna hold it up. Thanks for watching. I don't fucking know. I'm just doing this as like a coping mechanism. Oh, I didn't talk about coping mechanisms. Obviously, there's therapy, medication, if you're bipolar, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics. If you're schizoaffective, same thing pretty much. If you're major depressive, unipolar, SNRIs, things along that line. Therapy can be helpful. It's less helpful for schizoaffective and bipolar. I see a therapist, and I've seen therapists for a really long time, and pretty much what we talk about is we just talk, because like cognitive behavioral therapy tends to not be the most effective thing for it. Just having someone to talk to is great. Yeah, mindfulness stuff, if you're into it. I kind of fucking hate mindfulness stuff, but that's sort of a me problem. I also have ADHD, find meditation pretty difficult. And they'll say like, oh, well, it's a practice. You just have to practice it. It's like a muscle. You have to stretch it. And you know who says that? Me, in my group therapy sessions. So I'm a bit of a hypocrite, but just changing your diet. I hate that one, especially if you're really depressed. Like, it's not just that simple to like, oh, just make fucking healthy meals. Oh, duh. Why didn't I think of that? Jeez, Louise, camera. Oh my God. What a conundrum. Oh, everything is falling apart. Exercise is a big one. Behavioral activation, that's a concept in cognitive behavioral therapy, pretty much stating that, oh, the camera. Oh my God. In order to sort of change the way you think, behavioral activation, change your behaviors. Exercise releases natural endorphins. Yes, you get it. Okay, the camera is just deteriorating massively. The tripod, really. So, okay, bye. Love you guys.